The 2023 Formula 1 season saw Mercedes not win even a single race. Yes, this was the first time in 12 years that Mercedes could not even finish a single race on the top step of the podium. What makes it even more astounding is the fact that just 2 years back, Lewis Hamilton was on his way to win the 8th world title in a Mercedes. Well, in 2022, the regulations changed. As soon as the regulations changed and we had the ground effect cars, Mercedes has been unable to find its way. In the last 2 years, Mercedes has won just a single race, which was George Russell winning the race in Brazil. Since then, nothing, not even a single win. And it seems like a major departure from a team that was dominating the sport. Now, Mercedes' history in Formula 1 has not been that long, especially if we talk about the Brackley-based squad. It came into the sport in 2010. It started dominating the sport in 2014, won 8 consecutive constructors titles until 2021, and has been unable to win more than a single race since 2022. How can a team have such drastic change in form? How was Mercedes able to dominate the sport for 8 years and then ultimately lose everything? What happened? In this video, we'll go through the journey of Mercedes. We'll take a look at both the rise as well as the fall of Mercedes, because both are very intriguing and arguably a true case study of how a team can succeed in Formula 1. In this video, we'll take a look at why Mercedes dominated the sport. Then we'll take a look at why Mercedes finds itself in its current situation. So first of all, let's begin with why Mercedes dominated in Formula 1. Now, when we talk about Mercedes, the team followed a step-by-step plan which helped it dominate the sport. It started, first of all, with hiring the people that actually know how to win in Formula 1. The first two hirings for Mercedes was Michael Schumacher and Ross Brawn, the two personnel that had dominated with Ferrari in 2000s. These two were tasked with the responsibility of bringing the team to the front of the grid, and bit by bit, both of them contributed to taking the team to the top by 2014. The next step was building a super team. Now, when we talk about a super team, it is a team that is filled with technical expertise from all across the grid, with personnel that had the highest caliber. If you just go through the list of personnel that were behind the Mercedes Challenger in 2014, you will be shocked. First, we had Bob Bell, someone who spearheaded the end of Ferrari's dominance and won with Renault in 2006 and 2005. Then we had Aldo Costa, who was part of Ferrari's dream team during its dominance. Then we had Jeff Willis, someone who had been an understudy of Adrian Newey. Next up, we had Mike Elliott, a name you guys might be more aware of, but someone who actually impressed everyone with his work with the Lotus in 2012 and 2013. And finally, we had Andy Cowell, a man with a wealth of knowledge of building engines. When you had a complete dream team of these people with such technical know-how, it was always going to succeed. And that is what proved to be the building blocks of Mercedes' dominance. To add to all of this, to manage this talent, we had Niki Lauda and Ross Brawn overseeing everything. What Mercedes truly did was hire brilliant talent and then have responsible people at the top who would be able to ultimately harness the potential of the talent that has been brought to the team. Now, the next factor that played a role was the early migration to the V6 turbo hybrid project. Now, again, there are multiple reports and there have been multiple claims, but it is safe to say that Mercedes was the first team to actually start work on the V6 turbo. And not only that, the team, well, it had a major head start over everyone. And it was obvious when the first time you had the Mercedes out on track in 2014, and you could see, well, the Mercedes engine was class apart. And it was this advantage that ultimately proved to be the cornerstone of Mercedes' dominance. At least in the first 3 to 4 years, Mercedes had no parallel when it came to the power unit. And that was something that the team ultimately built its entire success on, having a power unit that was miles ahead of everyone else. It was so good that it made Williams a regular podium contender. Just imagine something like similar happening today. But that was the kind of dominance that the Mercedes power unit had at that point in time. And one of the major reasons behind it was the early awareness of Mercedes to start work on that power unit before anyone else could. Finally, when all these things were set up, Mercedes took the final step of hiring an elite driver. Now, Mercedes had Michael Schumacher and Nico Rosberg at the time, but Michael Schumacher, with his advancing age and probably a waning motivation to an extent, was probably not the best driver if Mercedes was looking to usher an era of dominance. It was during this time as well that Michael announced his retirement from the sport and Mercedes was able to court Lewis Hamilton. Now, at that point in time, there were three drivers that you could arguably say were the elite level of talent. The first was Fernando Alonso, then we had Sebastian Vettel, and finally we had Lewis Hamilton. Now, Sebastian Vettel was winning comprehensively with Red Bull, while Fernando Alonso he was in contention to win the title with Ferrari, while Lewis Hamilton, on the other hand, he was not quite happy with McLaren. It was during this time that Niki Lauda proved to be the trump card and he was able to lure Lewis away from McLaren to Mercedes. And as we all know, the rest is history. And it turned to be the best decision of Lewis Hamilton's career. Now, once you add all these factors together, you have the perfect recipe for dominance. And that is precisely what Mercedes had in 2014 when it started dominating the sport. Now, let's take a look at the next chapter on how Mercedes, after dominating for 8 years, how the team has fallen off and how it cannot even win even a single race in a season. Now, the first reason behind this fall is, to be honest, it's arrogance. And it was obvious in 2022 from the comments from Lewis, even from Toto to an extent in Netflix, where he claimed that everyone had a target on their back. Lewis Hamilton, a comment that has actually went viral at the time and even continues to do so even right now, when he said that his team does not make mistakes. And even the Mercedes design team, with its insistence on continuing with the no sideboard concept in 2023 as well. Overall, it was the arrogance of the team that had been winning, or at least building the fastest car for 8 consecutive years. When you do that for 8 consecutive years, you almost feel that you cannot do anything wrong. And that is precisely the overconfidence, arrogance, or whatever you can call it, that actually worked against the team. Because if the team had been humble enough to actually admit that the zero sideboard concept was not going to work, maybe the starting point for Mercedes would not be as far back as it is right now. Now, talking about the second factor, it was Red Bull getting its act together. In 2014, Red Bull found itself in a situation which it had not expected at the time and was probably alien to it. And that situation was that the power unit would be so under par that it cannot even compete with Mercedes. Even from 2010 to 2013, when Red Bull dominated and won its 4 titles, the power unit was not the best. The Renault power unit, it still did enough, even though it was comparatively under par compared to Ferrari or Mercedes. However, in 2014, the gap was just too big. And when that happened, Mercedes just ran away with the title and it had no competition. For Red Bull to get back to competitiveness, it had to forge a new partnership with Honda. Again, it took years. It wasn't until 2021 that Red Bull was in a shape to actually fight Mercedes. And once that has happened, it has truly turned the tables on Mercedes. Because right now, Red Bull is a team that ticks all the boxes. Everything is up to the mark, be it strategy, be it personnel, be it even the pit stops or the other operational aspects, and obviously be it the car. This was not the case during Mercedes' dominance, and that is precisely why Mercedes tended to enjoy this advantage over everyone else. Having a power unit that was clearly ahead of everyone else, and then having a car built around it, it helped Mercedes dominate. But when the power unit advantage was gone, Mercedes was eventually caught out in 2021, and from that point onwards, it has become a bit tough for Mercedes to compete. Now, the third point is the resource drain. Now, when we talk about the dream team that was there in 2014, there's not even a single member of that team that is left. In fact, the latest exit was from Mike Elliott. Now, when you talk about Mercedes or any other team, of course, resource churn it's an eventuality, because that is something that is always going to happen when personnel are either going to pursue new challenges or just their time is up. This can happen, but the problem with Mercedes has been that some of the key performance providers have left. Arguably, one of the more notable omissions has been James Allison, someone who had taken a backseat in 2021-2022, and you can see that it had an impact. Now, whether his return can truly boost the team and help propel it to the front of the grid, who knows? That's very hard to say. But what you can see is that there has been a large churn in the last 3 to 4 years where engineers and specialists have left for McLaren, Alpine, Red Bull and Aston Martin as well. When there is such a major resource drain, it takes time for the team to get back to performing at a high level. And finally, talking about the fourth factor, it has to be the fact that Mercedes, admittedly from Toto recently, Mercedes ignored excellence in areas because it felt it could get away with doing the bare minimum. This was something that was obvious in the pit stops, where Mercedes, well, it had decent pit stops, but it was never the class of the field. And this is something that even Toto Wolff has admitted these days, where he admitted that Mercedes focused on doing the perfect pit stop, but speed was never the part of it. It never targeted a below 2-second pit stop. That is something which arguably teams like Red Bull and McLaren have accomplished. To add to this, the operational excellence of Red Bull has tended to be the key differentiating factor when it is compared with almost every other team. And Mercedes falls in that bracket as well. Mercedes has almost always lacked when it comes to strategic brilliance. Of course, there have been a few exceptions, there have been a few races where Mercedes has pulled off a masterstroke. It's not a regularity. And that is something that, especially in a world like today, where Red Bull is pretty much pushing the boundaries in terms of efficiency in every sector, that's where Mercedes is lagging, because arguably the team did not evolve with the times, and that is where it is currently getting caught out. Okay, so now that we've covered what helped Mercedes dominate, and we've also seen what led to its decline, the question is what's next for the team. So I think when we talk about what's next for Mercedes, I think what's next for Mercedes is a period of recovery, and it will be interesting to see how the team proceeds and how it goes about it. But most importantly for Mercedes, for now, the team needs to focus on incremental growth, because if Mercedes is fighting for the title in 2024, it will be a miracle. So these were my views and my take on how Mercedes ended up dominating the sport for 8 years, and then it had its surprise fall. What's your view? Why do you think Mercedes had such a brilliant rise and such a drastic fall? Do let me know in the comment section. Please like the video, share it with your friends, subscribe if you've not already, and see you next time.